Are you aware that it's possible to become addicted to practically anything? And have you ever wondered why that is? Well, today we're going to find out as we explore a really interesting book called Dopamine Nation by Dr Anna Lembke. Let's check it out. If you are a little bit unsure as to what dopamine is, it's probably a word that you've heard quite a few times on this channel. And effectively what it is a neurotransmitter. So the parts of your brain wiring kind of look like two little trees, nearly but not quite touching. And how they transmit is to effectively kind of squirt either dopamine or serotonin or one of a plethora of neurotransmitters between the two ends. And dopamine is one that is heavily involved in the pleasure and reward neural pathways. It is actually physically possible to become addicted to practically anything. And the reasoning why that is that if you get excited about something, the dopamine is what's governing that excitement. It is the neurotransmitter responsible for wanting things and anticipation. And essentially the nuts and bolts of this book is about how we are completely drowning in cheap sources of dopamine, things that have little risk but also give us the pleasure of a small reward. Things like video games. So if you're not aware that, say, pokie machines and the development of new pokie machines, they actually get psychologists to effectively make things, like they calculate the exact time frame of when your dopamine is released after pushing the button as to like how much the win-loss ratios will be. And it's really quite disgusting once you actually open the hood up, so to speak. But so dopamine is the anticipation neurotransmitter. And she talks about some kind of a few experiments which are a little bit dubious, and I'm not sure they'd be done today, but there's a few of them where I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the rat utopia experiment, where if a rat has everything a rat needs, it's actually quite difficult to make them dependent on a substance. Essentially, these people were testing the addictability of certain drugs, and it was found out that it's almost impossible to get a rat addicted to a substance if they have everything they need in their life. And so it was kind of thought that us being genetically, we're mammals same as rats, there is going to be enormous similarities to our the functioning of the insides of our brains. And it's true. So like if a person has everything they need and want, the addiction is much less likely to happen. But if you've got like a massive kind of psychological hole in your life, you're going to try and fill it with practically anything that will give you the smallest little hits of dopamine and excitement. But in the long run, what you're actually doing is training your brain to need more dopamine and bigger hits to achieve the same emotional state. And it's why drugs like methamphetamine are so incredibly addictive, because it promotes and triggers the body to release up to 1200% the regular level of dopamine that's in your system. And essentially each, and that's why people get the diminishing returns from the drug, and the rest of their life goes to shit very quickly, because you're never going to feel content when you're not high. It is like physically impossible. So it's any wonder that a lot of people have a lot of trouble getting off of these drugs. So there were two sections of this book that really, really stood out to me, and one of them was the using pain to cure pain. And what it's about is that the only reason that drugs actually work on us, and that could be alcohol, cannabis, amphetamines or whatever, the only reason they actually function in the way that they do is because our bodies naturally make very similar chemicals. And essentially what happens is you have a receptor that can only receive chemicals which have a certain molecular shape. And the drugs which people take can fit into that same receptor slot. And yeah, it is possible through kind of manipulating your body's dopamine levels, and through kind of, what do you call, like dopamine fasting in a sense. So you're taking into account that you know that you've got elevated dopamine levels, and therefore you want to actually try and reduce them by either putting your body in a controlled pain state, or just by simply doing very difficult things, inducing the delayed gratification, which we are just running out of incredibly fast in the modern world. Because, like I said, everybody has these cheap, easy hits of dopamine that their lives are pretty well flooded with these days. And yeah, it's quite difficult to get away from. And one of the scariest parts of the book is the section where Dr. Lembke talks about how the profit motive in current capitalism seems to be at odds with our own mental health. If that essentially software companies, places like casinos, even food manufacturers, they want their products to be more addictive, and they spend big money to make them more so and to get you hooked on it. But there's not as much glorification in doing the hard work. But essentially, because the profit motive is just make money at all costs, no matter what, you have the emergence of businesses like Facebook, which are monetizing your attention through these small hits of dopamine to get you hooked, and then they're selling that on as ad space. And it's created this kind of toxic feedback loop where the companies themselves, because they're beholden to the shareholders, and their shareholders are making obscene amounts of money, they seem to be trapped in this never-ending feedback loop where they can't escape from it because they want the money, and they are themselves addicted to this rapid, fast-paced way of making money. And you might not think of it as very much in that, they're getting, a cent here and there from putting an ad in front of you for 10 seconds, but across 8 billion people, that adds up very, very quickly. But as I said earlier, using a kind of dopamine fasting or pain state to essentially reset your body's internal dopamine receptor so it doesn't need as much to make you feel good anymore. And I've had some pretty good success with that. Like I said, I was addicted to hard drugs, and I used hiking, exercise and reading, doing difficult things that I enjoyed traditionally, to pull myself out of it. And it was a very, very difficult slog to do, but it's 100% worth it in the end. One of the things she hints at is you don't get self-respect by doing the easy things all the time. You're only going to get it by doing the hard things. So using the pain. The other thing is, like I said, the only reason that drugs in general have any effect on us at all is because they can slot themselves into the receptors for what's called endogenous, meaning something that is made inside the body. I said pain will naturally induce endorphins, which are a natural endogenous opioid. And once you understood that, you can understand how people get addicted to opioids so easily. You can effectively, by using controlled pain or controlled pain states or pain-like states, to induce your body's own natural opioids. There's a big long section about a guy who was addicted to coke for ages, and he actually used the tool of ice baths because over a few studies it was found that cold exposure therapy, there's a guy on YouTube, Wim Hof, talks about it quite a lot. It increases, I believe they did a test where they got 10 to 20 people to take an ice bath for about an hour, and they did blood tests before and after, and they found that the ice baths increased dopamine by up to 250% for at least an hour after the cold exposure had finished. And I believe there was another neurotransmitter that went up by about epinephrine or something like that. But dopamine levels in the blood went up by 250% for up to an hour after the cold exposure therapy. And if anybody here is a runner, the phenomenon of runner's high that's exactly what it is you are putting your body under a large amount of stress to induce the endogenous painkillers. And the guy does joke around with almost saying that he's kind of turned the ice baths into its own addiction, but it's obviously a much healthier one than a cocaine-fueled bender every second night. So one of the other parts of this book that I very thoroughly enjoyed was when she started talking about a type of depression that she's seeing more and more of in her clinical psychology work. And effectively what it is when someone kind of projects what they want their life to be out into the world, but it's actually very disparate compared to what their life is actually like. It isolates it isolates the victim quite significantly, then leaving them in a depressed state, which leaves them open to substance abuse. And what she spoke about in the way she's treating it is just kind of like extreme honesty and extreme authenticity. And that really, really, really resonated with me. So as I went through my teens and 20s, I was trying to fit in with my peer group, and it was at the expense of my authentic self. So I have always been a huge nerd. I think I saw Star Wars when I was probably 3 or 4 years old and have had a love for science fiction and all things nerdy, and then threw that into astronomy. Anyway, I had lost all of that. I'd lost connection with my authentic self and my inner child. And it's only through bringing back what I thought were the best parts of myself and the most authentic parts of myself, bringing them back to the surface and stop trying to be this thing that you don't actually like. And I had great success from it. Like I said, I always used to enjoy cross-country running, which is what led me to the hiking. I couldn't really run as much as I would like to because I stuffed my knee up doing high jump at school. But yeah, like I said, it's trying to bring back the most authentic parts of yourself, and if that means you have to sacrifice some parts of your life and perhaps your friendship groups, then so be it. Unfortunately, you have to shed these. If you can't change for the better if you're unwilling to change in the first place. So there's a few bits where Anna talks about, I think she referred to it as positive social shaming, and how that is a mechanism that is used in the 12-step programs to get people clean. In that, shame is a bit of a dirty word these days, and it's because shame and guilt are so closely tied together. Essentially, they are the same emotion, but they just have kind of like, guilt is more an internalized trigger, whereas shame is external. But at the same time, like, shame can be used for positive good. And she talks about, I believe there was a woman going through a 12-step program and she accidentally drank a little bit of alcohol, whether it was consciously or unconscious, it's never really spoken about after. But yeah, she did the thing of going to the 12-step program, and her mentor or sponsor or whatever it is, and yeah, she actually reset her sobriety thing, and this was a form of positive social shaming. So it's one of those things where it's like we've kind of got to dissociate shaming with looking down on. They're similar, but they're not the same. But anyway, Dr. Lembke's patient had some really good success with the 12-step programs. And just that level of kind of social accountability, I think, is a huge one. I know that I got into the serious trouble with my addiction issues when the drugs and alcohol were no longer a social thing. And the more I tried to hide it, the more isolated I became, which pushed myself further into the drugs, and it completely decimated my dopamine levels. And it's very difficult to reset it after amphetamine use, but it's taken me about 2-3 years now, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. But I think Dr. Lembke is right on the money with a lot of this stuff, and there's a lot of similarities in this book to the Australian one I read recently, Brain Reset by David Gillespie. And yeah, it seems that like there's kind of two ways to approach mental health. One is kind of like a psychosocial one, and another one is understanding how these dynamic chemical equilibriums inside our brains are actually functioning. So guys, have you read Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembke? I very, very highly recommend this one. I reckon it would be an extremely good read as kind of a cautionary tale for anyone who is the parent of a teenager. Or any kid, just kids, if you have kids in general, I very highly recommend this book because it'll start to get you thinking about, well, first of all, you reflect on your own life, but then you start reflecting on your parenting and how best to set up the environments around home and how you're going to raise your children when it comes to the easy dopamine saturated environments that we find ourselves in 2022. But I digress. It is stuff like that you need to be aware of to raise a healthy child in dopamine saturated environments. So I want to talk to you guys about this one. If you've read this, let's chat about it in the comments below. If you haven't, I very highly recommend it. It seems like everybody is actually waking up to the scientific approach to mental health and what's actually going on in here. And I think we desperately need more of that if we are going to solve and not raise a generation of assholes and narcissistic abusers, because if you're slowly increasing your dopamine tolerance, it's hard to care about anything else besides your next hit. Like, that's exactly where that kind of cliched view of a druggie comes from. It's the fact that they've completely fucked their natural dopamine cycles and the levels to which it's maintained. And yeah, it is incredibly hard to pull a person out of that, especially if they don't want it. But yeah, like I said, if you've read this one, let's chat about it down below. Until next time, I'm Nathan. This is Walk It Off. Go outside, get better, be awesome. Catch you next time, guys.